So, good afternoon, one and all. I am Abhinandita, your host for this lecture, and you'll have to bear with me for just a little while. So, on behalf of Voices from the Periphery, which is our humble attempt as under and postgraduate students to transform subaltern studies in little ways, it is a heartfelt honor to welcome you all to today's much anticipated lecture titled Across and Inward Crafting Borders and Memories in South Asia. This gathering holds particular significance as we are graced by the presence of one of the most insightful scholars of the field, Dr. Philipp Johannes Zehmisch. I welcome you, sir. We all welcome you here. So, a little introduction. Dr. Zehmisch is a renowned anthropologist, a valued faculty member at the South Asia Institute, Heidelberg University. His scholarly work engages deeply with political anthropology, migration, subaltern studies, and post-colonial theory with a focused regional lens on South Asia, especially India and Pakistan. His studies aim at, as he himself writes in his paper on ethnography and inequality, to undo unequal power relations within academia implied in established research practices which distinguish between the researcher and research, or subject and object, and also aim at decolonizing a professional field that has increasingly come to be viewed as Eurocentric, paternalistic, patriarchal, heteronormative, and white. I quite enjoyed this paper, sir. Grounded in rigorous training in sociocultural anthropology, Dr. Zehmisch has conducted extensive fieldwork in the Andaman Islands, where he talks of the indigenous population, the Bengali Hindu refugees, and very significantly, the paradox that lies in the inclusion of subaltern speech into the circuit of hegemonic modernity, where he talks of how the indigenous people themselves choose anarchic ways of life to escape the state. His insight provides us budding scholars a priceless lens that redefines modernity itself. All this culminates in his critically acclaimed monograph, Mini India, The Politics of Migration and Subalternity in the Andaman Islands, a work that once again insightfully examines the entanglements of displacement and the multi-layered processes of nation building in the frontier spaces. He is also the co-editor of Manifestations of History, Time, Space, and Community in the Andaman Islands, a compelling volume that brings together interdisciplinary perspectives on memory, identity, and historical consciousness in island societies. Across his work, Dr. Zehmisch demonstrates an unwavering commitment to foregrounding the voices and lived experiences of marginal communities, thereby enriching contemporary discourse in anthropology and postcolonial studies. With academic experiences spanning South Asia and Europe, Dr. Zehmisch continues to contribute meaningfully to cross-regional dialogues on borders, identity, and the ethics of everyday resistance. Dr. Zehmisch, we are truly honored to have you with us today. Let us now immerse ourselves in the dialogue ahead, as Freire says, that cannot exist in the absence of profound love for the world and for people.
Thank you very much. This is an amazing introduction, and I'm more than glad to be able to speak to this online audience and in this recording. So yeah, thanks for this opportunity. I'm sharing now my screen, so I won't be able to see you. Maybe you just tell me if you see the full screen, and that way you confirm.
Yeah, sir, it's visible. Will you please make it full screen, perhaps?
Oh, it is in my view is full screen. Do I need? I did it in full screen. Ah, yeah. Okay. 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 Ignore. I had it on my view. I had it in a full screen. Is it now full screen?
Yeah, I think it's fairly visible. Yes.
It was not full screen here. Maybe I need to try again. Now? No.
Sir, I think you stopped screen sharing, if I'm not wrong.
Okay. Okay, so we do it again. I keep it here on full screen and then I share. It's still not in the full screen. Yeah. Anyhow, I think then I just start like this. If it's fairly visible, that's also fine. So, title of my talk today is Across and Inwards, Crafting Borders and Memories in South Asia. And as you have observed, let's say, conflict and war between India and Pakistan during the past few weeks, and maybe you have also been equally shocked, like by me, by even some progressive forces being engaging in jingoism. So I think this is this theme is up to the present day and has an enhanced urgency and importance. So on my structure, so I will first engage in the research question, positionality and methods. Then I will go into what I have been termed inwards, that is on partition historiography and the ethnographies of South Asian borderlands. And then I'm going to move on in a third step across engaging into cross-border collaborations and the dialectics of partition. In a fourth step, I will highlight cross-border ethics and social aesthetics of resistance, and then I will conclude this talk. The research questions, and I think I need to actually go on screen sharing, otherwise I don't have the slides. So that is a bit. So may I ask what you're seeing right now? Do you see a full slide?
Yes, sir, about research questions and goals.
So it's already lined up. Then I don't do this the animation, but it's lined up. It can be read. Okay. Then I go via this. So the goal for this talk is to inquire into my interlocutors' reasons for and limits of their engagement with the long-lasting legacies of partition in two dimensions. And one is inwards towards their own nation-state polity and across, which implies an orientation across national as well as internal borders. So out of this emerged two questions that concern the crafting of borders as a consequence of partition and its memorialization, which are paramount. And the first one is what motivates interlocutors in India and Pakistan to engage in the discourse about partition, and what does this tell us about these actors, their ethics, and their visions for the futures of South Asia? And again, these days it's probably as important as before, as ever. And second is, in which ways do my interlocutors employ tropes of love and hate, affection and enmity, longing and belonging in their narratives? The agenda is here to analyze the intersection of border making and memorialization and crafting a transcultural memoryscape across South Asian divisions. So I'm here also addressing intentionally India and Pakistan with this term South Asia, which kind of encompasses, among others, their commonalities with other nation states. And the aim is also to transcend a methodological nationalism by thinking with and through interlocutors who do collaborate across borders in order to combat the ambivalent enmity of India and Pakistan. And I'm calling this enmity ambivalent because it's always it's full. Enmity is here also full of, let's say, there's an ambivalence with friendship and love and hate and positive and negative feelings towards the other, longing and belonging. And this serves to engage in a transcultural dialogue across borders by engaging with the dialectics of us and them, or sameness and difference, enmity and affections, longing and belonging. What I term cross-border ethics, and I will elaborate this in the part of the talk, is to transcend mental and physical boundaries by trying to liberate thought and everyday practice from exclusivist and chauvinist nationalist claims. So this is an ethical stance to cross borders, and I mean both internal borders and external borders. That means it implies collaborating across borders as well as with those demarcated as other within the nation or as anti-national. And this is, of course, largely meant at certain communities, which I will address. The method I'm implying is a sort of what I may term an ethnohistoriography. It could at other points also be called an anthrohistoriography, but because it's specifically ethnographic, I would prefer to call it ethnohistoriography. Scholars studying the contemporary historical legacy of South Asia have tended to concentrate mainly on trying to understand either its historical past or its ethnographic presence. Reflecting on the relationship of history and anthropology, Bernhard Cohn argued in 1980 that the academic traditions, methodological training, and particular cultures within anthropological and historical faculties have produced different approaches and working styles. And I quote, anthropologists work in space and historians work through time in their respective construction of accounts of otherness. End of quote. So I'm asking here, how can one combine insights from oral histories that narrate the past in an ethnographic present with an analysis of the ethnographic present that is constituted by constructing the past in order to explore the memoryscape of partition and borders? So I'm saying here, basically, very simply, if I'm doing fieldwork and conduct oral history, it's always people talk about the past because that constitutes basically their belonging in the present. And in that way, it's also always historical. And otherwise, I'm also constructing at the same time a sort of history in the present that will later on, when people look at it, be recounted as a kind of particular subjective approach to a history in the present. So I'm also thinking of the future, of what impact does academic knowledge have now. And here it's also then, of course, important to construct it from by considering the voice of those who might otherwise not be heard. My own positionality is within this is very particular. I have done a PhD on migration and subaltern in the Andaman Islands in India with 2 years of fieldwork in the Andamans, which let's say culminated in a lot of publication, but among others, the monograph Mini India, the Politics of Migration and Subalternity in the Andaman Islands, published 2017 with OUP Delhi. So I've come basically from India, and then from India in the sense of working in India. And then I've started a postdoc research in the beginning with the title Dichotomous Sovereignty, Cultures of Memorization, Historiography and Nation Building in South Asia at LMU Munich in 2015, so 10 years ago. And since 2015, so I started to inquire into what are actually the legacies of partition, what does it mean for South Asia? And since then, I've more and more concentrated the research on partition and borders in Pakistan, in which I've spent 5 years since then, and India. I did another spell of fieldwork in India, 3 months. So I've come from India, I've been working in Pakistan, but I'm interested in the border and processes of bordering. And this was also, among others, conducted while I joined Lahore University of Management Sciences, LUMS, as a visiting professor of anthropology from 2018 to 2020. And very interestingly, that was also during one of these 2019, the situation when this war was impending and Jet was shot down, and we were sitting in the classroom the next morning, and the students were afraid because we were in Lahore and near the border. So this was also a particular, let's say, emotional, affective engagement with border studies. And out of this research also, I can crystallize this in ethical motivation and on to engage with conflict and cross-border relations in Pakistan and India was, of course, animated also by looking for commonalities and solidarities across the border that contradict the discourse of enmity. So I will never kind of declare this enmity as something that's not present. But I think there's much more than that. It's much more ambivalent, as I've mentioned before. And there's a lot of friendship and longing across the border, even in these moments of intense and heightened linguistic enmity. I am now coming to my first major part, and I might also excuse myself for reading it because, but I think it's easier to read at that point my text, and I hope to read it out very clearly for you. The most prominent and visible manifestation of the history of the subcontinent is the socio-cultural, political, and ecological space of the borderland between Pakistan and India. A highly securitized fence and guarded strip of 2,912 kilometers length. Here the term partition becomes manifest in the particularity and unique character of the border in South Asia. It enmeshes spatial and performative elements of border making, through which the narration of the nation, to quote Homi Bhabha, becomes meaningful for Indians and Pakistanis. It has created an alienated borderland, according to Martinez, 1994, a militarized space that can hardly be crossed and which acts, unlike other, more fluid and less clearly demarcated and securitized borderlands in other parts of the world, as a line or a corridor that cuts through space and hence limits movement and access to formerly communal places and commons, sites of religious worship, markets and resources, grazing grounds and fields, kin and friends. These, and to quote David Gellner, borderlands of North and South Asia act thus as a distinct mode of geography, landscape, and ideational force. Concerning the massive impact of the process of border making on those who became citizens or alternatively mere subjects of Pakistan or India, one needs to investigate the long partition through the lens of border studies. And the long partition is a term that has been coined by Wazira Zaminda, and it basically means that partition has been long-lasting, that it structures the relationship in India and Pakistan within the countries and between them on an everyday level, and it can be discovered in the everyday. In addition, drawing on the body of research formulated in the interdisciplinary venture of borderland studies, one may investigate modes of connectivity in border areas. Refuting the widespread notion of borderlands as being marginal, the research builds on the assumption that remoteness is linked to specific forms of connectivity within and across borders. Studies on cross-border regions, cross-border trade, as well as cross-border relations and conviviality highlight the diversity, fluidity, and connectivity of borderlands in spite of their geographical remoteness and frequent discursive marginalization. Further, one may also critically think with several studies on borderlands in South Asia which analyze the practice of challenging, subverting, transgressing, and transcending of borders. Most of these studies do, however, lack a sustained examination, I claim, of the ethical foundations and outcomes of processes of border making. Coleman, 2015, views borders as, I quote, routes across which ethically charged speech may travel, quote, unquote, and where the ethical becomes manifest and objectifiable. Both epistemologically and ontologically, border studies move away from statist perspectives of borders as demarcations of international boundaries. Instead, they embrace the terminology of borders to study metaphorical and psychological notions of borderlands or border zones in day-to-day interactions and exchanges. Borderlands can thus be conceptualized as zones of transitions and exchange between the local and the regional, the national, and the global. They are sites of encounters with difference and otherness that beget creativity and cultural hybridity. Yeah, so this is a map I'm showing you right now that has been this so-called displacement map that has been made by Dr. Srishti Sethi, that dear researcher also has worked on Pakistani Hindus with whom I've collaborated. And this map shows basically some of the movements across the borders of communities, among others in partition 1947, the blue one, and post 1965 war, the red one. So I will first of all now first concentrate on communities that would be post 1965 war or that will be affected by these wars. And this is largely in the region of Rajasthan and Cholistan or southern Punjab and Sindh in Pakistan. Cholistan is a region within that. I'm coming now to my ethnographic example, the Cholistani borderlands with Rajasthan. So as you see, the map, Cholistan is a desert that is actually very unclearly divided from Thar Desert, and it's overlapping. And you need to imagine this as a combined space that has for forever before partition and border making been integrated, where communities would overlap, move across, very often nomadic communities which have places of worship, places of subsistence on both sides of what is now a border. And the question is, of course, what effect did it have on them? I encountered cultural hybridity when conducting fieldwork in October 2016 among Mangania musicians from Barmer district, Rajasthan, India, living close to the India-Pakistan border. The Mangania belong to a hereditary Muslim musician caste that has strong religious, musical, and genealogical links across the border into Sindh and Pakistan, and which hybridizes elements of Islam and Hinduism in their everyday musical and religious performances. These practices confirm that the Mangania compose musical borderlands, as they have been called by Shalini Ayagiri in 2012, by molding religion, politics, cultural practice, and different musical systems into a unique borderland identity. Many Mangania in Pakistan, they're by the way called Manganhar, but it's the same community, do in their everyday life engage in puja for various local devis such as Swarupa and Hinglaj. And this is, one needs to mention this nowadays, they engage in puja largely while being formally Muslims. So here we have a minority aspect within India and a very hybrid everyday cultural practice. I will give you another example after where we also see that. And Devis such as Swarupa and Hinglaj are very important in the whole area. And Hinglaj Devi, as you might know, is the biggest Hindu pilgrimage place in Pakistan. So, of course, the border now means they cannot visit Swarupa, Hinglaj, Swarupa. Exploring the Mangania's memoryscape and oral history accounts unearthed the theme of multiple losses through the long partition and the effect of bordering. First, they mourn the loss of access to the desert and pilgrimage spaces in Pakistan, especially to Lal Shahbaz Qalandar and Abdul Shah Latif Bhittai in Sindh, as well as Hinglaj Devi in Balochistan as a result of border making and the inability to get pilgrimage visas. Second, as their economic activities are linked to a professional tradition as hereditary peripatetic service providers to judgments or patrons, the Mangania also have a long tradition of traveling along with caravans, sometimes smuggling caravans to what is now Pakistan. Activities that continued until border fencing was completed in the 1980s and which the elder generation of Mangania mourns as a time of adventure and freedom that has gone by. In parallel, my fieldwork among Meghwal Hindus from Cholistan in southern Punjab, Pakistan, since 2017, also shows this interesting aspect to have been cut off, as this quote also says, we have been cut off from Rajasthan. So here also the question comes up, what does the border mean for Pakistani Hindus who live on the other side? The Megwal community belongs to a former nomadic Dalit community who share not only a border with Rajasthan, India, but also overlapping socio-cultural and historical features brought forward, which brought forward a similar border crossing cultural hybridity. This is exemplified in their affiliation to the local Sufi Khwaja Ghulam Farid, whose songs they perform as non-hereditary professional musicians while being formally and officially categorized as Hindu. So this hybridity is not paradoxical given their affiliation to the border crossing Saint Kabir. So they are basically Kabir Panthis, and they are formerly Hindus or Dalits. The question is also if Dalits are Hindus, especially for them. And they would have Ram Devra as one of the local deities, a house shrine. But we also went, for example, to a Darbar of Sayyid Bukhari Haider Shah in the desert. They go to Kabir Pant festival, which means a particular hybridization of different, let's say, of religious division in their everyday practice. And most, they're especially affiliated to the local Saint Khwaja Ghulam Farid in that region in Saraikistan and southern Punjab, Saraiki speaking areas. Is a very important local saint who had lived around 1900. And one of the Megwal's ancestors, actually, who came from the region of Jaisalmer, became a chela of Khwaja Ghulam Farid, and who was sitting with him, and and that is when it started that they were reciting his songs. So here there's this interesting, I think this was actually the normal state almost before partition, that actually the divisions between religious communities were very shifting and not so clearly defined, and one was especially not excluding the other. So Khwaja Ghulam Farid is something that you also now see in everyday life, in their environment, on petrol station. It's depicted in touristical places. So Khwaja Ghulam Farid is the most important component of their local identity and patronage, and they sing their songs. So this, as Hindus, I just wanted to point it out, in the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. So they're very much, from that aspect, religiously, they're very much integrated, which is very different from the socio-cultural and political status as Hindus, in which they face a lot of problems in terms of, especially in terms of practice and everyday discrimination. There comes a caste discrimination also into play, as being Dalits, but also as Hindus. So they feel as second-class citizens, but religiously, ritually, they're quite well integrated in the region. So, and what partition did is separate them from among others, from the shrine of Baba Ramapir or Ram Devra and Ronechai near Jaisalmer. So this is over the border. So they actually have, some of them have gone with pilgrimage visas to India. Some of them have also tried to live there and come back. And so pilgrimage has been an option for those who get privilege or get an invitation. One of my interlocutors was invited by a Kabir Pant into India, to a tour to India. Some of them have been to Haridwar and big pilgrimage places in India. And but here they have, across the border, not even 150 kilometers from the village, is actually their original village, where they still have relatives, and this is near, and this is Ram Devra, so Ramapir, Baba Ramapir is the local goddess they relate to. How did it come about that they came to be stuck in Pakistan? And this is because they were actually, the borders were made, and they in the beginning didn't realize they were living in the area, and then at some point the border was closed in the 80s, or like say fortified. The border was, but they could have crossed it before, but as a community they came to be settled. But they were nomads. For them it didn't matter much. But what happened is they were settled in villages, Chak, and this was part of canal colonization. So they were settled in a village with a name after a canal and its number and letter. And this was given by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. In Bhutto's time, they were settled. And the aim was actually to make along with canal irrigation, to make the Cholistan desert fertile and to increase agricultural production, at the same time to control and maybe also tax earlier semi-nomadic herders like the Megwal or Megwal. They call Megwal in the region, and Sindh they call Megwal. So and they were earlier, as I mentioned, settled across the Thar Desert with spiritual enkindlings across the border. And Megwal are, by the way, in both India and Pakistan, scheduled castes, but in Pakistan this has no consequence with regards to affirmative action. And what I always inquired into and what I mentioned is an active longing for India, with even the claim that Cholistan is actually Rajasthan. So there's a regional identity they subscribe to. And most of my interlocutors in Cholistan, not only from this family, I will quickly also describe a family, have also plans to move to India, still ongoing. And this is something that has been now suspended because visa processes have been, with the recent conflict, been suspended as far as I know. So they are again, once and again, in a limbo, which is very, let's say, typical or an everyday experience for subalterns. Especially I came to be interested in this group I'm working with because they're musicians. So these are coming from nomadic background, Megwal, but developed a musical tradition that started recently in the 70s with Fakira Bhagat, which is a local. He was discovered by Benazir Bhutto, and he is, let's say, one of the personalities in the region that he's referred to. He passed away in 1999, and then his younger brother, as well as his sons in two different lineages, have taken up music and passed them on to their children. So they have become sort of professional musicians. But they still wouldn't call themselves hereditary musicians like the Mangania, but they're shawky musicians. And that means they play for shawk. Fakira Bhagat became comparatively widely known. He also went on tours to Germany. Just because I'm living in Germany, I found that also curious. And he went also to England and other places, and to India as well, in a Saraiki association meeting in Delhi, for example. So what I want to say is that there's a certain cross-border circulation of people and also things between the countries that animates also this Hindu identity and the cross-border orientation for these Hindus. So we see here a calendar that is there. So a lot of ideas and objects flow, and also people flow. They have flown. Many of my interlocutors have been to India, came back, want to move there permanently. Parts of the families are already there. Some in Falodi, that was also affected by the recent strikes. Some are in other places. So there's a cross-border circulation and a mobility as well. And as maybe former nomads, there's also an intentionality to move. So having said that, I also need to mention very personally that the Mangania musicians in India will be coming to Germany very soon, and we're about to organize them a gig. So these are also long-lasting sort of commitments, and I'm very much looking forward to it. So here we have two groups, two subaltern groups, and two states who are both belonging formally to religious minorities, and who both in their everyday practice subscribe to hybrid ritual and religious practice, and subscribe also in the songs and in the performances to something that really I would characterize as a cross-border ethics. I will come to that later in the talk. I'm moving now on from the subaltern section to something else I observed, and this is largely among urban, very often middle class and higher class interlocutors who have displayed a certain willingness and proclivity to collaborate across border, and this is especially in the last 10 years, sometimes 15 years, to orient across border. So I went, for example, to a book on Park Tea House, which is a famous tea house in Lahore, by the book talk in Delhi. I went by Mahmoud Faruqi. I went to Kathak performances. So there's an orientation across border that one should not downplay even in times of jingoism. Then there's numerous documentations of actually oral histories of partition. One very prominent is the 1940 partition archive, where people are really across border documenting oral history. So I also view that as a part of what I will call a cross-border ethics and ethical orientation across borders to undo something and maybe to work for a commonality and future of South Asia. There were books written and blogs produced based on oral histories of partition. One was The Footprints of Partition by Anam Zakaria from Pakistan, or the Hiatus Project by Anchal Malhotra from Delhi, who concentrates on objects, several books. There were theater and films based on oral histories of partition, among others, the Theater Wale, The Voices of Partition. It was a very, let's say, a prominent theater drama they performed in Pakistan and across in the US. And also films, numerous films were made. You can probably know some of them yourself, documentaries. Then there was cross-border civil society engagement, especially earlier, relaxed visa policy, bring people together. And this was especially in pre-Modi Congress time India, when there was a larger willingness to sort of work towards conciliation and peace. So in these times, there were also more mobility in people-to-people programs on various levels, on student level, on university level, and on bureaucratic level. And of course, and this is besides the pilgrimage and family visit visas that were possible. So this is all covered under this idea of people-to-people contacts. This was accompanied also by friendship being displaced on social media, among other through cricket diplomacy, which was and probably is a very important component of how to approximate each other, and especially also on the left, I discovered the articulation of voice for minorities within their own country and promoting reconciliation. So this is Kamala Bhasin in visit, and Kamala Bhasin from India, late from India with the Awami Workers' Party. Rawalpindi was on visit, or I saw students in Hyderabad, Sindh, organizing a function in memory of Bhagat Singh. So I can say there is, and we've seen similar things in India. For example, I went in 2016 on a demonstration against warmongering in Delhi. So I think there are levels in which especially the left has been working progressively towards peace. But unfortunately, there were recent setups on both sides in which actually people from the left were engaging in jingoism. So it's not a one-sided picture. I can say the left is like this or that, because there was, for example, also a demonstration in Lahore. I attended saying Pakistan-India dialogue is the only solution, no more war. Was never a solution, and Pakistan-India friendship, please. So these are the voices. And what I wanted to say is in this subject chapter part of my talk that there's a discursive division over how to approach the other, and one can also, of course, engage only in the enmity, but I like to also engage in what is actually positive, what is the sort of peace industry as well. How is it promoted in social media, and we will surely see also other times after this recent warlike developments in that relationship. To come to the aspect that I have announced greatly and I want to conceptualize now, cross-border ethics. For me, cross-border ethics is a progressive ethical orientation to redefine internal, that means imagined, effective borders to create a different collective self. It's about reworking the self in the light of the other. It's about breaking, transforming, and creolizing borders through transculturation and collaboration across internal and external borders. The aim is here to create a new self by redefining the other in order to shape better futures and visions of a better life through better politics. And the search and cross-border ethics is a search in less communalized and more pluriverse hybrid religious past and presence. And among others, the Sufi practice, the Kabir-Pan practice, Bhakti practice might be also in a religious realm somehow related to it. And cross-border ethics also might be an imagined legacy of public conviviality and a resilience in folk culture. But it's also in translated concepts from elsewhere, like secularism, democracy, and alternative political ideologies, which also imply frictions, as Anand Singh has called them. What I want to say is secularism, democracy, and other ideologies might also be taken up in this whole aspect of cross-border ethics, of a cross-border ethical orientation. But there's also always frictions because we know secularism doesn't mean the same in India and Pakistan as it means in Europe. So we should just be careful when applying concepts like secularism, democracy, or Marxism to these settings and understand them out of their own particular situativeness and positionality of actors. Cross-border ethics, hence, is a collaboration and solidarity across borders and boundaries within the country, along with minorities, and which change the historical narrative of enmity to India or Pakistan and across borders. And there are institutional channels through which an alternative, non-antagonistic relationship to India is cultivated, among others, as I've shown, through social media, civil society organizations, political parties, universities. This finds expression in one hand on Pakistan, a longing for India, an undivided India, largely through TV consumption of Bollywood, cultural memory and travel. And some members of the elites, cricket fans, school classes, and Pakistani Hindus used to travel to India, as I had shown that Pakistani Hindus especially had been, and I know a good number of elites who had been to India. And what they discovered largely is a nostalgia for lost unity, a work for the continuation, retrieval, and revival of the artificially divided legacy, which is religious, regional, linguistic, and ethnic. And fields I've seen it is literature, dance, film, music, and theater. And also, as I want to say, apart from these performative aspects or artistic aspects, there's also a resilience in some sections of folk culture that defy antagonistic models of nationalism and communalism. And there was at the Thari border once when I crossed it, I saw this beautiful mural which said, Dil ka darwaja khol ke aana, par wapas jaakar bhul na jana. So I think that demonstrates actually this idea of cross-border ethics. So to conclude, thank you for listening so long to my presentation. So partition and the genealogy of the post-colonial nation state led to a variety of internal and external borders, having widespread societal effects at the psychological, emotional, and affective level that have crafted the memoryscape of both countries. There are ambivalent enmities and cross-border ethics that I have investigated, but this collaboration across border also has limits, I must say in the end. Also, in the danger of kind of crushing some hopes for future that I might build up. Um, the reference to the other is omnipresent in everyday life. Pakistani talk about Indians, Indians to some extent about Pakistanis. But this is also at the same time a means of self-making. And I believe it's more about the self than the other. The other is needed to create the self. And even if that is in a positive way, it can lead in a positive way to a redefining of Pakistan means in the light of India and also of what India means in the light of Pakistan, because both can only do exist with a historical legacy and they need the other. And as much as jingoistic nationalists need the other to conduct war, maybe to, let's say, detract from internal rifts and for other reasons, to justify more defense spendings in a world that's increasingly militarizing, nonetheless, there's this also very cultural everyday aspect of situating the other. And one thing I wanted to also hint at, it's in the subtext of what I've been presenting, there are different class dynamics in the memorization process. So the class dynamics for the Mangania and for the Megwar in Cholistan, for them, the border is a presence that has cut them off in their everyday life from access to a lot of, let's say, sites and means of subsistence. And this is a very, very physical, also physicality of the border. And for them, memorization is something else. It's more encoded in rituals and songs and in visits and pilgrimages. And then there's this artistic production, which is largely situated in, let's say, often in higher classes, artistic and literary production that intellectualizes this phenomenon of partition and division and tries to work against it on that level. And I'm not playing out ones against the other. I just want to highlight that there's different ways to memorialize the this tragedy that has actually led to a lot of suffering over now almost 80 years and to the recent warmongering that we have seen. And with this, I thank you for everyone who's listened to my talk, and I welcome your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your really insightful talk. And I mean, I can't even begin to emphasize on how it's so important, especially right now. Right. I have a few questions as a scholar myself, and then I think we'll move on to, after concluding a little bit, we'll move on to the questions other scholars are having on our platforms. Right. So you talked about really important notions like everyday borderlands and these emotional and moral borders that exist in the everyday, right? And I think we as students who come back home and have everyday debates with our parents from a different generation regarding the India-Pakistan issue, understand especially how these moral and ethical borders exist, right? So my question to you is, as the upcoming generation that is going to mold the future of these perspectives and the prejudices that exist due to nostalgia factors and, like you said, imagined legacy, right? How do we combat it in public spheres? How do we talk about it in schools, offices, or perhaps even to our parents who have this notion of nationalism uh, that that creates biases, that and also, would you talk a little bit about the pre-Modi and the post-Modi border cultures? Like, you talked really intensely about your research on border cultures, and I hope we get you even in the future so that we can talk about it in detail. But how did these cultures seep into each other across borderlands before, and is there a change now after the post Modi government into the seeping of these cultures into each other? If you could, maybe.
Yeah, thank you for these two questions. So I would first start with the first question. Yes, I think one can be also nationalist. I've thought about this question quite long. One can be nationalist and one can be patriotic without sort of playing that out against the other. And the other, I mean, both Pakistan as an entity or China that as an entity, plus especially those who suffer the brunt of it are actually the minorities. So it's something like, and this is in Pakistan, the Hindus, and in India the Muslims, and to some extent the Sikhs as well, and the Christians, but to a different level. And of course the minorities, if you count it, it's also Dalits and Adivasi. So it's probably 50-60% of the population. So 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 the idea of India, especially as we speak to an Indian audience, is India was beautifully built on this idea of unity and diversity. This is a legacy that the Congress has upheld, with all the critique one needs to admit towards Congress in other dimensions. But this idea is something that I had seen in the Andamans, that really beautifully worked, where people were from all kinds of castes and creeds and would actually live together, and would not kind of engage in that jingoistic othering among each other. And now I think this is something that has to, of course, be brought back actively by students and scholars and teachers and into the everyday, and also in the school curriculums. And I know there has been in both countries quite shocking reforms of let's say the education system that streamline the narrative into a national narrative that confirms the two-nation theory. And I think one should be aware that the two-nation theory is also just a theory, and that the realities I've been trying to show, especially with my Mangania and Cholistani interlocutors, are very different. And the reality on the one hand is very harsh for them on a social, cultural, political level, being a minority, but in their ritual, in their traditional practice, and the religious practice, they are definitely anti-communal. And I think one needs to combat this, basically communalism and jingoism. But it's also very difficult, I know, at the same time, to fight against such hegemonic logics. Your second question is concerned, I think, the past and the Congress governments before Modi. So my fieldwork in Andamans was, for example, during Congress governments. What I would feel at the same time, and I did it at that time also almost proudly, owning India to some extent, that India had a very strong civil society. And I think there's for sure some aspects of that are still there. But there's an ongoing battle in the public between, I think, efforts to curb alternative voices, and of course, in an age of, let's say, of social media and communicative capitalism, in which people will nonetheless always spread the message in some channels. So, to summarize, under the Congress, freedom of speech was and a certain type of liberalism was for the upper and middle classes much more present. That the subalterns, or those who are actually at the sort of at the receiving level, the have-nots, had no doubt also a lot of problems in these times during the Congress. But the upper class and those who raised the voices had better opportunities. And with regards to India and Pakistan relations, there were some SAARC initiatives, South Asian Regional Cooperation, which enabled visas and other stuff exchanges to a much larger extent than it has been in the recent years, especially since 2019. Most of this has ended. And this is tragic because, for example, I know a very good Kathak dancer from Lahore whose guru is in Delhi. So he learned in Delhi, he went to Delhi, up and down. Suddenly he's not allowed. I mean, that's on an individual level, it's tragic. It's tragic also for a lot of people on both sides who have an active longing for the others, who want to actually. People in Pakistan tell me, I want to visit Ajmer Sharif, I want to visit Lucknow, and all these places I know from films and stuff. And of course, they can't. It's very sad at the moment. So I really hope this, and I know that the similar longing is there in India as well. So I know there's something that has been like amputated, cut off. And think of Germany as it has been divided by a Berlin Wall, and a wall, and East and West have been divided, and it was very difficult to cross um, that border, almost impossible. And at some other point, they reunited. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just saying we don't know what the futures are, and we can hope that somehow, at some point, these borders become less relevant and people can move freely.
Right. I'll ask the ones present in this meet if they have any questions. If not, I'll move on to this one question from our YouTube platform. Okay. So I think this question is relevant to what you were saying. So I'll just go right ahead and copy paste it in the message. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's on memory. So yeah, very interesting.
How does the interplay of silence, absence, and erasure contribute to the construction of memory? And how do these processes differ across geographies and communities you talked about?
Mm.
Yeah, very good question. I mean, silence, absence, and erasure also contribute to memory. And that's true. By erasure, you kind of manipulate sort of memory, but your memory, of course, your memory constructs something else. And we also know that memory of partition there's a lot of absence that has never been talked about. A lot of the violence families have not talked about, perpetrators till the end of their life would not talk about. Yes, I think there's something, if we psychologize, is there's something that's sublimated and that sort of strikes back in other places. So absence, silencing of certain memory is part of the pathological condition that erupts out of it. And I believe that in order to tackle these the larger societal problems, one also needs to engage in a positive construction of memories and bringing these things back into the discussion. And these processes, the second part of the question, how do these processes differ across geography and communities you talk about? See, in oral, these two communities I talked about, these are both subalterns, they're musicians, they live in borderlands, they're kind of marginalized. They don't have a high level of education. Many of them can't read and write. And so they have a very different form of memorization. So their memorization is also crafted in narrative. It's crafted in songs, and in some ways, also the whole music is a memorization in some ways of a shared past, because as you maybe know, probably know, in Sufi poetry, in among Kabir Pant, the main theme is actually the crossing of religious boundaries and the enmity to institutions and to the Maulvi, the Brahmin or the Pandit, who tells us actually what to believe, but it's about love. And this love, of course, knows no border, as much as a soul knows no border equally. There's another question from Voices from the Periphery. How do fragmented personal narratives and effective geographies of borderland communities in South Asia subvert the homogenizing logic of post-colonial statecraft? And in what ways do these subversions expose the fragile scaffolding of national memory, rendering the official archive complicit in erasure, exclusion, and the continued production of epistemic violence? Wow, that's a question. Okay, I think I need to fragment this to okay. I believe that personal narratives and affective geographies, as you mentioned, of borderland communities as such, which I presented, they subvert the logic of post-colonial statecraft, of nationalism and communalism. And they expose the fragile scaffolding of national memory by their presence. But one also needs to consider that there's not necessarily an either or, but that both coexist at the same time. Some of my interlocutors would even subscribe to some of the nationalist narratives. They're not free from them. So I called some of my Pakistani interlocutors, and they said, yeah, of course we are with Pakistan right now in this war, because I asked them if they're okay, because nearby one of the drones had attacked near in the region. And they're Hindus, but still they wouldn't. I mean, of course they would say this is our homeland. So in some ways, what I want to say is it's again ambivalent. The people are ambivalent on the one hand, and every day they really expose this idea of the Maulvi, the Brahmin, the nation state as an Islamic nation state in Pakistan, or as a Hindu nation. Hindutva in India. So they expose it by working against it on an everyday level, and they perform, and there are people there, they celebrate it. These are rituals, these are narratives. So in some way they expose the scaffolding of nationalism. But of course, as the other one is, the nationalism is hegemonic, it has much more means to spread its message. And epistemic violence is, of course, continuously produced by the official archive. And I think here, on a very basic level, these people I had worked with, these communities I've worked with, they expose how inadequate parts of the official archive are. And but we also know, as I mentioned already, that these voices are subaltern, and the problem of their subalternity is not easily solved, as we know also from other authors who have worked on subalternity. So even me giving a voice here, this is also to a very, very, let's say, very, very particular audience, and this voice of me doesn't solve the problem of such communities and individuals lacking voices in the public. That's a sad state of affair. But still, I'm hopeful that we can contribute in some way or the other to some sort of change as well.
Right. Thank you so much, Professor Zehmisch. I think that says a lot about how these issues and our perspectives often get stuck into academia and do not seep into the public. Right, yeah. We often think about it, and perhaps that is why our initiative of Voices of the Periphery and, engaging especially masters and undergrad students and trying to listen to their voices from the margins we'll perhaps someday make a change, and we'll perhaps get you again as a speaker. And thank you so much for that insightful talk.
Thank
We
you, and
have
I would
things to
love
reflect
to.
on.
I
Yeah.
would love to also at some point talk about the Andamans because it's with Indian audience is also important. But I think it was like almost like how can I say like a let's say a fateful intervention that you asked me to talk about this topic, and we had before all these things happened in the last month. We had set the talk much before, so I'm glad it took place at this point.
Yeah, I really loved how you brought in your positionality as a scholar. That is so important, especially when talking about something and the representational value of it. We have learned a lot today, and we thank you truly.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, if there are no more questions, I think we can conclude today's talk here, right? Okay. Thank you, Professor, again, once again.
Okay, bye bye.